So we'll behave now.
Just done. And then we will get started right at 9, just so we make sure we have all the minutes we can before we sign off at 9:50, so folks can hop over to worship at 10 o'clock.
Sounds good.
Can I watch yours? I'll watch.
Yeah.
Don't you get seen?
Yeah, but that's fine. Do you want to?
No, stay right there.
Well, I've got 9 o'clock, Mary D, and there's Russ. If we want to go ahead and get started, looks like we've got, I'd say, 25.
That's good.
People or so that's fantastic. So Mary D, I'm gonna mute myself and I'm gonna spotlight your video.
So they automatically see the speaker? They don't have to pick speaker view? Okay, all right, go ahead.
So I'm gonna hand it over to you and I'm gonna spotlight your video and I'm gonna mute myself.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I hope you can see and hear me. This is a little disconcerting to see my face on a computer screen for Sunday school, but it won't be here for long. So Drake had a family emergency. His pup is not doing well this morning, and so he asked if I would handle announcements. So welcome to all of you that made it in. We have about 25 people, Wilson says, that have joined so far. But it's been a while since we've gotten together. I've missed everybody. I hope you've all had a good summer and that you've been staying safe and healthy. Wish we could meet in person, but I'm really glad that you joined us and hope you didn't have any issues joining. If you're here, you didn't have any issues. But throughout, after the class today, if you have any feedback or questions, anything that didn't work for you, please email me or Drake or call us, and Wilson and Drake and I will work out the kinks and see if we can make this work for everybody. You're only going to be able to see and hear the panelists, what we call, this is Zoom webinar format, which is a little different from the Zoom meeting format that most of us have been using. In Zoom webinar, you'll only be able to see the panelists. Wilson Kennedy is going to be helping us support Zoom, and he set up the meeting, and he's what we call our host, and he's going to be with us for at least the first series of Covenant classes. We're really happy to have Wilson involved with the class. So you won't be able to see others, and they won't be able to see or hear you either, because we've muted all of you. So that with a class this size, phones ringing and dogs barking, and we don't want to be stopping all the time to say, so-and-so, could you please mute yourself? So we're using webinar. We thought that would run more smoothly for this purpose. But we're going to pause. I'm going to moderate the questions. So as Bruce is talking, you can type your questions into the chat function. There's a toolbar at the bottom of your screen. If you move your cursor around, a toolbar should show up, and it'll either say Q&A or chat. And over on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a blank, and you can type your question in. And as they come in, Bruce has said, feel free to interrupt me. So I'm gonna look at I'm going to monitor the questions, and I'm going to interrupt him, tell him he's got a question. He said we want to try to make this a back and forth as much as we can, even though we can't really talk to each other. If you have to leave the session or something happens or you talk to other people that weren't able to get in, all of these classes are recorded. They won't be posted right away, but over the next couple of days after class, they will be posted on YouTube, which is a better platform for projecting video.
And we'll send the link out, Mary D. Sorry to interrupt. We'll send the link out as well.
That's fine. Let's see. The Zoom link will be the same every Sunday for each teacher's series. So for Bruce's 5 classes, the same link will be used, but it will be resent each week, probably the day before, so you don't have to hunt too much through email. So please, so Drake had planned Clemson sports updates for this morning, and so we're missing those. He was going to tell us all about how Clemson is faring with sports in the era of COVID, but since we won't be hearing those, we'll jump straight to special concerns. So First News Weekly, check out your prayer list in Thursday's First News Weekly. I did note that we've got a couple of class members on the prayer list. Steve Siegel is recovering from surgery, and John Chase lost his mom on September the 5th. But check out the full list and keep those folks in your thoughts and prayers. So Bruce is not a stranger to Covenant class. He's taught us before, but some of you may not know him, and his professional background is in theater. And he is gonna tell you a little bit about himself and how he got involved with First Pres and teaching our class. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Bruce. We're gonna close class at 9:50. So everybody has a chance to hop on to the service, which you would access through another Zoom link.
I'll put the, this is Wilson. I'll put the worship link in the chat, so that, and it'll send it out to everyone, whether if you're a panelist or or an attendee. So you can just click on that; it'll send you right over to YouTube.
Thank you, thank you. And it's in your email and on the website. So Bruce, with that, take it away, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary D. Good morning, everyone. I can see that we have 33 participants, and if you add second parties to that, we're probably up to about 36, 37, 38 people. So welcome. I'm delighted and honored that all of you are here. I used to be a member at First Presbyterian, for those who don't know me. And I see there are now 34 plus participants, but I don't know who you are, except I know I would know many of you if I saw your names, but I'll have a chance to look at that afterwards. I am coming to you from my office, which is carved out of a corner of our basement in Bon Air, which is why I have pipes behind my head, because we don't have a very large house. I do work in the theater, which means I don't have a very large house. I carved this office out of the little space that I had. We left membership at First Presbyterian probably around 25 years ago, or 20 years ago, maybe now. At the time, our children were attending or getting ready to attend Bon Air, Crestwood Elementary in Bon Air, and they didn't know, weren't school friends with their Sunday school friends at First Pres. And we decided that we should get them into a church where they had Sunday school classmates that they knew the rest of the week as well. And so, with a great deal of sadness and regret on my part and my wife Terry's part, we switched membership to Bonaire and very quickly developed a wonderful relationship with lots of friends there. And then somewhere along the line, Mary D asked me when this all happened, and I honestly don't remember. But somewhere I was invited to come back and teach at First, and then somewhere along the line, I was invited to come teach at Second. And so for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been a bit of an itinerant Sunday school teacher, teaching at Bonaire and at First and at Second. And I really enjoy that experience, and I very much appreciate your having me. The main thing to know about me when I teach Sunday school, and it scares me a little that this is being recorded, because I am not an expert at anything that I'm about to talk about. I come to Sunday school class with lots of questions. I never teach from a book. I always teach things that interest me. And the main thing that interests me is all the questions I have about the topics that we will discuss. Under ordinary circumstances, discuss would be the operative word, and there would be lots of conversation back and forth. Today, I suspect there's going to be less of that because we are on Zoom. But nonetheless, as Mary D said, if you do have questions, type them into chat and she will interrupt me, and I will do my best to answer them or to throw the questions to Wilson, who will be far more expert, having just studied all of this for your Bible review quiz, you know, as you approach ordination. You'll probably know a lot more than I will, but I don't mind being interrupted and would be happy to have you do that. So if we can, let's begin with a prayer to help me get myself centered. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us together this morning through this miracle of technology. Help guide me as I discuss these Bible stories that we tend usually not to discuss. Enrich my thought process and my ability to communicate and be in all of our hearts and minds as we do our best to figure out what the Bible is saying to us today. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Okay, so today I'm going to bring up my first slide, and bear with me a little as I do this. This worked momentarily ago. There we go. All right, wait a minute, now I got it back up. Don't read this slide yet, because that's not the one we're on. Well, let's do this. All right, wait a minute. We got together early on to make sure that all of this worked. Now I ought to be able to get rid of the menu by clicking this. All right, we're going to have to deal with the menu being over on the side, it looks like.
Bruce, I think if you go back to your full screen and hit the presentation button again down at the bottom.
Well, I'm doing that.
Then hit
but what it does is it advances me to the second slide.
Yeah, go hit the presentation arrow, or hit the presentation button, then hit the left arrow on your keypad, on your your keypad, and then it should take you back to the beginning.
Well, I'm doing all that.
I could just do it with the menu. That's just, yeah. So hit the left arrow.
There we go. Okay. So what we're going to be talking about over the next 5 weeks, thank you, Wilson, is Bible passages we ignore and why maybe we shouldn't. Today, September 13th, Who Let the Bears Out? We're going to be talking about the passage in 2 Kings 2, 23 and 24 about the jeering of Elisha. Then next week, we will talk about owning our own mistakes. Following the next week with Who Would Jesus Hate? The next week with Tough Love. And finally, on October 11th, with God Said It, I Believe It, and That Settles It. This series came about because about 10 years ago, let me see if I can. About 10 years ago, at Bon Air Presbyterian, we all had the full church decided to read the entire Bible one semester, all of us doing it together and dividing up into groups. And I can say that this was the first time that I had ever read the entire Bible. When I was a very young man, I had read those books that were really popular, The Greatest Story Ever Told and The Greatest Book Ever Written. The first being sort of a modern adaptation of the New Testament, and the second being a modern adaptation of the Old Testament. So I was somewhat familiar with many of the stories, although not all. But when we were reading the entire Bible and discussing it week by week, I encountered all of these Bible passages that truly confused and flummoxed me. And I loved the fact that I was able to get together in small group with other members and discuss particular passages. One of the ones that intrigued me in the Old Testament was the passage that we are going to discuss today. And now my arrows aren't working here, Wilson.
Let's see. You might just be able to hit the enter button.
Let's try that.
No?
No.
And the right arrow isn't doing it this time?
No, it's not.
Oh, goodness.
All right. Well, I can still get there. Wait a minute. All right. Elijah is jeered. Verse 23 in 2 Kings 2. From there, Elisha went up to Bethel. As he was walking along the road, some boys came out of the town and jeered at him. "Get out of here, Baldy," they said. "Get out of here, Baldy." He turned around, looked at them, and called down a curse on them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 she-bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. Now, 10 years ago, I came across that passage and I went, holy smokes, what the dickens is this? I have never heard this passage preached upon before, and I think there's a good reason why. And so I decided, well, let's go ahead and talk about this in Sunday school class. One of the things that bothers me the most about this passage is what bothers me the most about the Old Testament in general. And I'm going to come to this next slide here. Well, my cursor had gone away. Here we go. There, okay. The Bible's bloodiest books. When I did the math about how many people God smites and kills in the Old Testament, if you don't count the Apocrypha, which you see down here, since we're not Roman Catholics, we don't have that in our Bible. But if you add up the other people that God kills, and this doesn't include Noah and the flood, because we don't know how many people that killed. But when you have specific numbers in the Old Testament, you come to about 2.5 million people that God kills in the Old Testament. And he does it in ways that are staggering. Sometimes it is bears, as it was in the passage we just read. He kills twice people with lions. He uses snakes. He uses insects. He has a wall collapse on 27,000 people. And 3 times he kills people with hemorrhoids. And you read these stories and you go, this is not the God that I am familiar with. And so you start to ask each other, why on earth these passages exist? 2 Chronicles, you can see, is the big winner, and that's because of 1,000 Ethiopians, 1 million Ethiopians who are killed in 2 Chronicles. And then there are 500 Israelites that are killed in 2 Chronicles. And these are all pretty bloody stories about a God of carnage and a God of vengeance. I'm trying to find the number. I think it's 160 passages talk about the killing sprees in which God engages. So I tried to figure this out, and we tried to figure it out, I should say. And we kept coming back to this. If you look at the first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the first 5 books that make up the Torah in the Hebrew Bible and the Pentateuch in the Christian Bible, they are all, we are told, written by Moses. And when you talk to people and say, were they really written about Moses? Let's talk about who Moses is. Some people get really upset because when you say, I don't think they were written by Moses, and you offer other solutions, as many scholars do, some people find that threatening. For whatever reason, I'm not one of those people. There's absolutely nothing that threatens me by the conversation going, who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible? It was probably not Moses. If you look at ancient writings, if you look at the Iliad and the Odyssey, which describe a period of Greek history that lasted from about 1600 BC to 1100 BC, and was written, we are told, by a blind poet named Homer. And then you look at the Pentateuch, and it's 5 books, and the action in the books takes place roughly from 1600 BCE to 1100, the exact same period of time as the Iliad and the Odyssey. And they were written, we are told, by the great prophet and religious leader Moses. You find similarities between the two. Now, no one gets offended when you say the Greek histories of the Iliad and the Odyssey were written so that all of the wars in which the Greeks engaged are explained and lead up to a point where the current Greeks are when the books were actually written. And the books were actually written during the 6th century BC. Pretty much everyone agrees that. And they probably weren't written by a blind poet named Homer. Homer is a legendary figure in Greek mythology and history, based no doubt on a real person, but most of the Iliad and the Odyssey were written by people other than this figurehead named Homer. Modern scholars tend to agree that just like the Iliad and the Odyssey being written 1,000 years after the events took place in the 6th century BCE, probably these initial books of the Bible were also written down in the 6th century BCE when the Jews were in the Babylonian exile. And the purpose was to explain how the Jews got in the situation they were in. If in fact the Jews were God's chosen people, and the purpose of the book is to show the special relationship that exists between the Jews and Yahweh, so that Jews in the Babylonian exile could understand what happened to them. These books are written, particularly Deuteronomy, and then the histories that follow, because the books that follow Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, which we'll set aside for a minute, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, make up the history of the Jewish people. And in this history, we are shown that God makes promises of love and grace to the Jewish people. And then he breaks those promises when the people themselves fail to uphold their end of the bargain. Many people will say that the Iliad and the Odyssey is written to help the Greek people understand how they can best live with each other. And these first 12 books of the Bible, or 14 if you go through 2nd Chronicles, are written to show the Jewish people how they can best live with God and understand God's relationship to them. And so they are full of violence. The Old Testament is full of God judging people, the big one being, of course, Noah and the flood, deciding that people don't pass the test, and then smiting those people time and time and time again. The story we're looking at today being the story of Elisha. But when we ask the question about who let the bears out, the answer to me goes back to, see if I can sum this up here. Goes back to the question of who is sending the bears out? Is it God actually saying, I'm going to kill 42 youths or boys because they said an insult to Elisha? We'll talk about Elisha in just a minute and what preceded and what follows this story, but I found this political cartoon online and I want to share it with you. And it was first published decades ago during the presidential administration of Teddy Roosevelt. And clearly it is based on this passage from 2 Kings about Elisha. And here we have Teddy Roosevelt donning the holy robes of a religious prophet. And instead of boys who jeered him, these are all Wall Street bankers in this political cartoon. Rockefeller is right here. You can see his name written right down there if you get out your magnifying glass, as I did. And these are all very wealthy men on Wall Street. And the bears are labeled Interstate Commerce Commission and something else here, because the political issue of the time was that Teddy Roosevelt, in a fit of righteous indignation, used various powers of government to rout the richest men on Wall Street and send them packing. And so they used the story of Elisha to say, here is Teddy Roosevelt wrapping himself in the garments of righteousness to send the two she-bears out to dispatch the 42 Wall Street bankers. I couldn't help but think as I was looking at this, if we related this, well, I tried to think, how do we relate this to current events? And if you had this same cartoon with Donald Trump up here holding the cross in front of the church during the recent photo op, sending out his troops to rout the protesters. In each case, the cartoonist would be saying, we have a political figure that is donning the robes of righteousness to enact vengeance on his political opponents. And is this the message that we are meant to take away from this story of Elisha? I really don't think so. In fact, I think just as the cartoonists are saying, we should not have political figures calling on God to enact vengeance on the people that they perceive to be their opponents. I think the danger with interpreting a God of carnage, you know, from the Old Testament into how we live today is that you wind up with situations like when the hurricane was supposed to hit Virginia Beach 10, 15 years ago, whenever it was. And then it didn't. It went up the coast and slammed into New York City. And the next day, Pat Robertson came on TV as a religious leader and did that thing that we're not supposed to do, took the Lord's name in vain and said, I know why God did this. God did this to save we righteous people in Virginia Beach and slam the gays in New York, because it all happened after a particular incident when gays were exercising their newly found power in New York. So again, you had a political figure holding up religion and saying, see, God attacks the people that are on the other side of this issue. I was sorry when I was watching the Republican convention to see Mike Pence end his speech with God bless the Republican Party and God bless the United States of America. I would like it if neither party chose to say, well, God will bless us as we humans try and figure out which political side of an argument we are going to be on. If you look at it historically and you say, the reason all this violence driven by God appears in the Old Testament is because the writers were trying to say to the Jewish people, we need to remember that, yes, bad things have happened to us. Yes, we are in exile in Babylon. And the reason bad things happen to us is because we lost track of our relationship with God. And we started focusing on other things. And when that happens, when that relationship is broken, bad things happen. If those are the reasons these stories are written, then the change that comes between the Old Testament God of carnage and the New Testament God of love and forgiveness becomes less jarring. There's a lot of discussion about what is true, the inerrancy of the Bible, and is every word of the Bible inerrant, incapable of being wrong? And you will hear people say, a lot of people say, well, it is metaphorically true, but it is not literally true. And so I tried to go back in my psychology texts and figure out what truth meant in ancient times compared to what truth means today. And what you find is that pre-Aristotle, Aristotle was one of the first that actually started talking about what is true and what is not true. In the pre-scientific age, truth, the difference between literal truth and metaphorical truth didn't exist, because the scientific documentation we have that allows us to say, yes, this is literally true because scientifically we can prove it. None of that existed back then. And so all that existed then was metaphorical truth. Once when I was teaching on Jonah and the whale, I kept coming across all these biblical scholars that went, people hearing that story in ancient times thought of it as a tall tale, thought of it as a tale of wonder. They didn't think they were meant to think of it as being literally true. And so rather than worry about whether, how God kept this man alive in the stomach of a whale and then had the whale spit him out on land, they just said, this is a story that we're meant to understand the value of the story and the meaning of the story, and that is what about the story is true. Now, if we look specifically at Elisha and what was happening when this particular passage took place, about 8 years, 10 years maybe before Elijah, his mentor, died, Elijah decided, I need to pick a successor. So who am I going to pick? And God came to him and said, you need to pick Elisha, whom Elijah didn't know. But Elijah sought out Elisha and found him. And he was out working in the field. And Elijah said, God has chosen you to be the next major prophet here. You are my successor. You are to work with me until my passing and then take over from there. And Elisha, being divinely inspired, said, you bet. And he immediately killed the team of oxen that he was leading through the field. And he used the wood of the plow to start a fire, and he cooked the oxen and shared it with his family. And from that moment on, left his family and became a disciple of, and a student of, and a servant of Elijah. And for the next 8 or 10 years, we don't hear anything from Elisha, the student. And then we get to the story of Elijah ascending in the chariot of fire up to heaven. And the mentor, Elijah, and the student, Elisha, crossed the Jordan River. It was an easy thing for them to do because they would throw down their garment and the river would part and they would cross to the other side of the Jordan, which they did. And then the chariot of fire came down, took up Elijah into heaven. But before that happened, Elisha said, I have one request of you. I want you to give me twice your power. And Elijah asked God to pass twice his power on to Elisha, and then entered the chariot and rose up to heaven. So here is this young man at the beginning of his ministry. He still has 50 years to go. He probably still has a full head of hair. He's a young man, and now he's the most powerful and anointed prophet in the world, or among the Israelite people. So he crosses back over the Jordan River, and he goes to Jericho, and his first miracle is the water in Jericho is unclean and causing the women of Jericho to have miscarriages. And so Elisha purifies the water in Jericho, and then heads on to Bethel. Bethel being the place where all of the enemies of Yahweh are large and in charge, where they worship many gods. And Elisha says, well, I've done my first miracle, cleansing the water in Jericho. Now I need to head on to Bethel. And on his way there is when this group, this mob of young men, the translation comes out as boys in the early translations, and then it is changed in the later translations to youths. We are told the Hebrew word actually refers to young men from the age of 12 to 20, so not kids so much as young men, and a mob of them come out of this anti-Yahweh city, Bethel, and start jeering Elisha. And we know they're jeering him not just because they're saying, hey, Baldy, but the reason they talk about his baldness, some scholars will say, well, he had male pattern baldness, and even though he's probably only 24, he just had that. And others say, no, it's not that at all. When he became the great prophet, he shaved his head because that's what prophets did to signify that they were prophets. And then still others say, no, it's not that. He had a full head of hair, but a common insult among teenagers at the time was to call someone baldy, meaning they're irrelevant, even if they are not bald. So whichever one of these it was, this mob of people who do not believe in Yahweh descend upon Elisha and start jeering him. And so the Bible tells us Elisha calls upon God to put a curse on them, and then suddenly 2 she-bears emerge from the forest and kill 42 of the young men. Then Elisha doesn't even go to Bethel. He goes on elsewhere in his pathway, avoiding the city that had sent out such a harsh welcome mat to him. He picked up the clue phone and he headed around Bethel and went to someplace else. What are we meant to take away from this? What is the inerrant truth of this story? Is it that God is a God of vengeance and he will destroy the people that he doesn't like, the people who are on the different side politically? Or is what we're meant to take away from this that the relationship that we have with God is what is fundamentally important. That when Elisha is trying to get the people to worship one God, not multiple gods, and this particular God of the Jewish people, and trying to get them to understand that if they maintain that relationship, then ultimately good things will happen. And if they ignore that relationship, then that brings about bad things, not bears, but losing the relationship with God brings about bad things. I think this second interpretation, which is the interpretation that most people offer at this time, is the right one, and the one that doesn't make me feel like I have to check my mind at the door when I pick up the Bible and read it and try and figure out what it has to say to me today. We learn a lot about Elisha after this incident takes place, because this was at the very beginning of his career. But from all accounts, he did amazing work to bring together the people of Israel. He is a renowned prophet, not only in Jewish tradition and Christian tradition, but also in Islam. And one of the most interesting stories that I read as I was doing my research for today took place not in 1600 BCE, but in 1994. And in 1994, Turkey decided that they needed to reroute a river because of various scientific reasons. And where they needed to reroute, it's like the Tennessee Valley Authority, where they needed to reroute the river happened to be on, they were creating a new lake in this valley where they believed Elisha, the great Islamic prophet, was buried. Now, modern day Islam is a little less keen on Elisha than ancient Islam was, but nonetheless, the people who lived in that region worship at this shrine and hold Elisha in the highest regard. And so as they were rerouting this river and flooding this valley where the tomb of Elisha is alleged to be, the Turkish authorities realized they had a political problem. People are going to be furious when they discover we have just flooded the grave of Elisha. So furious, we can't even discuss this with them in advance. What we have to do is protect Elisha's grave. And so they set up a secret task force to come in the middle of the night, and this all happened, this is true, in 1994. Come in the middle of the night and dig up the remains, whatever is buried at this place that was alleged to be Elisha's tomb. Dig it up and move it to the top of the mountain so that the grave site now would overlook this lake that was being established in 1994. And so they set their secret plans to do this. And they had the scientists, they had the grave diggers, they had the theologians, but it was all secret. They didn't tell the public. And on the night that all of this was to transpire, they went to the grave and they began digging. And then, to everyone's surprise, all the citizens of this community had a dream in 1994 that something was happening at Elisha's grave. And they woke up, and just like if you remember that scene in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, when everybody starts creating that mountain out of mashed potatoes, and then everybody shows up at that real live site, you know, because they've had this premonition, this vision. The citizens of these villages around Turkey get up in the middle of the night, and they all converge on, hundreds of them, on Elisha's tomb in 1994. And they show up by surprise, and they watch as the scientists dig up and find a body and dig it up and move it to a new grave site at the top of the mountain that is going to eventually overlook this lake, which was created when they did reroute the river. And so their holy site is now on the top of the mountain overlooking the lake. So we talk about truth, and we realize that these tales of wonder, these magical tales that happened in the Old Testament, may have metaphorical truth, may have literal truth, may be rooted in literal truth, but even today in 1994, things that we cannot explain are happening. And in this instance, it all relates to Elisha. So next week, we're going to move on to another troubling passage. And hopefully it will follow what we're talking about here. I hope to have a through line that carries us through all 5 weeks as we look at inerrancy in the Bible and what we are meant to take away from these stories that seem so bizarre on first encounter. But then when we investigate them further, we go, well, maybe that's what we're meant to take away. So that's it for today. I have hit my 9:50 mark, and I'll turn things back over to you, Wilson, or Mary D, whoever.
Well done, and thank you very much. And we did not get any questions, but I would encourage people to think about this over the course of the week and send questions in by email to me or Wilson or Drake, and we'll get them to Bruce. And so he can have those in the back of his mind when he teaches next week and maybe talk to a few. And Wilson has just posted in the chat the YouTube link for worship at 10.
Great. And yep, Mary said that's the YouTube link. And I'll just put in a plug too that we do have the fall gathering this afternoon from 3:30 to 5 at the church. You'll hear lots about it in worship, but just wanted to do my due diligence and remind everybody of that now. So hope to see a lot of you this afternoon. Thank you all.
Thank you. See you next week.